Racist woman refuses to sit near black kid on a plane. Turns out his dad owns the airline. The airport was alive with the usual buzz of travelers moving in every direction. Luggage wheels rolled across the shiny floor, announcements echoed over the speakers, and people hurried toward their gates with coffee in one hand and tickets in the other. In the middle of this busy place walked a young boy named Jordan. He was only 10 years old, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made him stand out. His dark skin glowed under the airport lights, and his wide eyes carried both nervousness and excitement. It was a big day for him. For the first time in his life, he was traveling on an airplane without his father by his side. His dad had made sure everything was arranged perfectly. From the chauffeur who drove him to the airport to the airline staff who were instructed to look after him, Jordan knew he was safe. But still, the thought of being on his own made his little heart beat faster. He held his boarding pass tightly, his fingers squeezing it as though letting go would mean losing his way. As he moved through security, he kept hearing his father's voice in his head. "Remember, son, you're brave. You're smart. And if you ever feel nervous, just breathe and smile." Jordan had smiled at that memory, even while standing in line behind grown UPS who seemed much more serious about traveling than he was. When he finally reached his gate, he noticed how big the plane looked through the tall windows. It was even larger than he remembered from his last trip. Rows of windows stretched across its side, each one hiding stories of people traveling to reunite with loved ones, to start new jobs, or maybe to escape from something behind them. For Jordan, the plane meant adventure. It meant stepping out into the world like his dad always encouraged him to. A flight attendant walked over to him, a woman with a friendly smile and kind eyes. She bent down so she was closer to his height and asked softly, "Are you Jordan?" He nodded quickly, relieved to hear his name. "Great," she said warmly. "I'll walk you to your seat. Don't worry, we'll take good care of you." Together they walked down the jet bridge, the sound of other passengers behind them. Some carried heavy bags, some looked tired, and others looked just as excited as Jordan. The closer they got to the plane's door, the stronger the cool blast of air conditioning became, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted out from inside. Jordan's heart raced with excitement. Inside the plane, the cabin lights glowed softly, and rows of neatly arranged seats stretched forward like endless little homes. People were already putting their bags in the overhead bins, settling down, or talking to their seatmates. The flight attendant guided Jordan to his window seat. "Here you are, sweetheart. This is your seat, 14A. You'll have a great view when we take off." Jordan slid into the seat carefully, running his fingers over the armrest, the seat belt buckle, and the smooth little tray table. Everything felt new again, even though he had flown before. He loved how the window gave him a tiny frame to the outside world. He could see the ground crew moving around below, guiding bags and checking equipment. As he adjusted himself and looked out the window, Jordan imagined the moment when the plane's wheels would lift off the ground. He had always loved that feeling, the way his stomach tickled as the earth grew smaller and smaller. He smiled quietly to himself, forgetting his nervousness for a moment. A few minutes later, passengers began filling in the seats around him. Across the aisle, a young couple whispered to each other, pointing at their phones. Behind him, a man in a suit spoke quickly into his headset, making last-minute business calls. Jordan kept observing everything with wide, curious eyes, like he was watching a movie come alive in front of him. Then came the woman who was supposed to sit beside him. She looked to be in her mid-40s, dressed neatly in a cream-colored sweater and carrying a handbag tucked tightly under her arm. Her lips were pressed into a thin line as she checked the seat numbers, then stopped abruptly at Jordan's row. Her eyes flicked down at him, and her expression shifted instantly. It wasn't the warm, kind smile of the flight attendant, it was something colder, something less welcoming. Jordan felt her hesitation before she even spoke. She glanced at her boarding pass again, then back at the boy, as if hoping she had made a mistake. But no, the seat next to Jordan was clearly hers. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Jordan gave her a small polite smile, the kind his father always encouraged. But instead of returning it, the woman's brows furrowed. She stood there, unmoving, as if the very idea of sitting down was impossible. Passengers behind her began shifting impatiently, waiting for her to take her seat so they could pass. The flight attendant nearby noticed the delay and approached, asking gently, "Is everything all right, ma'am? This is your seat here." The woman leaned in, lowering her voice but not enough to hide the tone of disapproval. "I can't sit here. Isn't there another seat available?" Jordan heard her clearly. His small hands tightened around the armrest, though he tried not to show it. He remembered his father's words about staying calm, about not letting other people's moods change his own. He sat still, looking out the window again, pretending he hadn't heard. But inside, he felt a small sting of discomfort. The flight attendant, keeping her smile, replied, "This flight is nearly full, ma'am. Everyone has been assigned seats, and this one is yours." The woman sighed heavily, her shoulders rising and falling in clear frustration. She muttered something under her breath, something Jordan couldn't fully catch, but he understood enough. It was about him. It was about sitting beside him. The boy's heart sank a little, though he didn't move. He had looked forward to this trip for weeks, to the thrill of being independent, but now he wished his father was there. Still, he reminded himself that he was strong. He had to be. Finally, after a pause that felt much longer than it was, the woman dropped into the seat beside him, her body turned slightly away as if she wanted to keep as much distance as possible. She crossed her arms, set her handbag on her lap, and stared straight ahead without another word. Jordan took a deep breath and looked back out the window. Outside, the ground crew signaled to one another, preparing the plane for departure. The engines hummed softly in the background, a sound that usually made him happy. He tried to focus on that. He tried to think about the clouds he would soon see, the way the city below would look like toy houses and tiny cars. He didn't understand why someone wouldn't want to sit next to him. He didn't understand what he had done wrong. But as he sat there, clutching his seat belt quietly, he made himself a promise, no matter what, he wouldn't let anyone steal his excitement. He was still on this adventure, and he would face it with the same courage his dad always believed he had. And so, as the last of the passengers took their seats and the crew prepared the cabin, the young boy stared out at the runway with determined eyes. He was ready for the journey ahead, even if it had already begun with an unexpected shadow. The seat belt sign had not even turned on yet when the woman beside Jordan shifted in her seat with visible discomfort. She kept glancing at him as if his very presence was disturbing her. Jordan tried to remain calm, looking out the window and pretending not to notice, but he could feel the tension between them like a heavy cloud. Finally, she pressed the button on her armrest to call for a flight attendant. The small ding caught the attention of a young woman in uniform who quickly walked over with a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am, is there something I can help you with?" The woman leaned slightly toward the attendant and said in a voice that was not exactly quiet, "I cannot sit here. This seat doesn't work for me. Please move me somewhere else." The attendant looked down at her seating chart and back up at the woman. "I understand, ma'am, but this is the seat assigned to you. At the moment, the flight is full, and all seats are taken." The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "Are you sure?" she asked sharply. "You don't have anything in business class? Or even an empty aisle seat somewhere?" The attendant shook her head softly, still patient. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Everything is booked. If there is any movement after takeoff, I will let you know. For now, I do need you to remain seated so we can depart on time." The woman gave an exasperated sigh, throwing her head back as if this was the greatest inconvenience in the world. Several passengers nearby had started to notice the situation. A man across the aisle peeked up from his newspaper. A young woman a row ahead slowed down her movements while adjusting her bag, clearly listening in. The air inside the cabin grew tighter, though no one spoke. Jordan sat frozen, his small hands folded neatly in his lap. He didn't dare look at the woman now. He stared straight out the window, pretending to be fascinated by the luggage cart still rolling away from the plane. But his ears caught everything. The woman muttered under her breath, words sharp enough to sting. "I paid good money for this seat. I shouldn't have to deal with this kind of discomfort." Jordan's chest tightened. He wanted to disappear into the seat cushion, to sink into the fabric until no one could see him. He didn't fully understand why she said discomfort, but he knew she meant him. He knew it from the way her eyes darted toward him with irritation, from the way her body turned slightly away as if touching the armrest near him would burn. The attendant tried again, her voice gentle but firm. "Ma'am, I assure you the seat is the same as every other in this cabin. You'll be comfortable here. We just need everyone seated so we can safely take off." The woman huffed, rolling her eyes and shaking her head. She raised her voice this time, making sure half the row could hear her. "Comfortable? Sitting here next to this child? I don't think so. This is not acceptable. I want a better seat." The words fell heavy in the air. A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances. One man sighed loudly, clearly annoyed by the delay. The young woman ahead turned slightly, giving a sharp look back at the complaining passenger. Jordan felt his cheeks grow warm. He pressed his lips together and looked down at his sneakers. He wished he had his father's big hand resting on his shoulder, reminding him that he was strong, reminding him that he didn't have to carry shame for something he had no control over. But his father wasn't here. He was alone in this moment, and he had to rely on himself. The attendant's smile softened, though there was a trace of firmness now in her tone. "Ma'am, I need you to understand that every passenger deserves the same respect and comfort here. If you cannot remain in this seat, I'll have to speak with my supervisor. But as of now, this is where your ticket is placed." The woman crossed her arms, her nails tapping angrily on her sweater sleeves. She didn't reply, but her body language spoke loudly enough. She leaned as far away from Jordan as possible, her face turned toward the aisle, as though the view of the boy beside her was something she could not tolerate. Jordan sat quietly through it all, his back pressed against the window side of the seat, his knees pulled close together. He wanted to cry, but he held the tears back. His father had told him more than once, "Strength isn't about fighting back, son. It's about staying true to yourself, even when others try to make you feel small." He repeated those words silently to himself, letting them echo in his mind like a shield. Behind them, a man's voice spoke up. "I'll switch with her," he offered. He was middle-aged, dressed in a casual polo shirt, and his tone was sympathetic as his eyes landed on Jordan. "I don't mind. Let her sit by me instead." The flight attendant hesitated, then shook her head politely. "Thank you, sir, but for safety reasons and balance of the plane, we need passengers to remain in their assigned seats during boarding. After we're in the air, I'll see if any adjustments are possible." The man frowned, clearly unhappy with the rule, but he didn't argue further. The woman muttered again, her voice dripping with disdain. "Figures. Rules never apply when you need them." Jordan clenched his fists quietly in his lap. He wasn't angry, not really. He didn't understand anger the way adults did. What he felt was heavier than anger. It was the loneliness that comes when someone rejects you for no reason at all. He couldn't understand what he had done wrong. He had smiled. He had sat quietly. He had caused no trouble. And yet here he was, made to feel like his very presence was a burden. The engines hummed louder as the crew prepared for pushback. The pilot's voice came over the speaker, cheerful and calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We'll be departing shortly. Please make sure your seat belts are fastened, and all electronic devices are in airplane mode." As the announcement played, Jordan finally lifted his eyes. The reflection in the window showed the woman beside him, her arms folded, her lips pursed in displeasure. He saw himself too small, quiet, sitting in the shadow of her disapproval. But in his own reflection, he saw something else, his determination. The plane began to move slowly toward the runway. The flight attendant walked by one last time, checking seat belts. She paused by Jordan, giving him a warm smile that was just for him. "You okay, sweetheart?" she whispered. He nodded, his throat tight but his eyes steady. That smile gave him strength. He straightened his back, adjusted the belt around his waist, and fixed his gaze out the window once more. He would not let this ruin his flight. He would hold on to his excitement, even if the seat beside him was filled with coldness. As the aircraft turned and lined up with the runway, the engines roared to life. The vibration filled the cabin, and Jordan gripped the armrest tightly. The woman still sat stiff and annoyed, but he ignored her now. His world was outside the window, the blur of ground speeding by, the sudden lift as the plane's wheels left the earth, the breathtaking moment when the world tilted and the city below began to shrink. For Jordan, that moment was magic. No matter who sat beside him, no matter what was said, the sky still opened its arms to him. And he promised himself silently that no one could take that joy away. The plane had lifted smoothly into the sky, climbing higher and higher until the buildings and streets below looked no bigger than toys. Jordan pressed his forehead gently against the cool glass of the window, his wide eyes tracing the soft blanket of clouds outside. The sunlight spilled across the wings, making them shine like silver, and for a moment he let himself get lost in the beauty of it all. But even as he admired the view, he could still feel the weight of the woman beside him. She sat stiff and upright, her arms crossed like a barrier, her body angled as far away from him as the seat allowed. Every so often she let out a small huff or sighed loudly, as though reminding everyone around her how displeased she was. Jordan tried not to listen, but her presence was heavy, like a storm cloud hanging just above his shoulder. The flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisle, checking on passengers. Their calm voices and practiced smiles made the atmosphere lighter. One of them, the same young woman who had spoken to Jordan earlier, stopped by his row with a soft smile. She bent down and asked kindly, "Are you doing all right, sweetheart?" Jordan nodded quickly. "I'm fine," he whispered. She studied his face for a moment, noticing the way he clutched his seat belt buckle and kept his gaze down. "You're very brave," she said gently. Then she straightened, turned to the woman, and asked, "Ma'am, would you like something to drink? We'll be serving snacks shortly." The woman shook her head sharply. "Just water. That's all." When the attendant left, Jordan felt his cheeks heat up again. He knew she had asked because she could see what was happening, and he didn't want to look weak in front of anyone. His father had always told him that people's true nature showed in moments like this. "When you stay calm," his dad had said, "you show strength. Let the world see who you are, not who they are trying to make you." Jordan held onto those words now, repeating them in his head like a quiet song. A few rows back, he could hear a group of children laughing softly with their mother. Across the aisle, the young couple was sharing a set of earphones, their heads leaned close together. All around him, life on the plane moved forward as if nothing was wrong. Yet Jordan sat in silence, caught between the beauty outside his window and the coldness beside him. Not long after, the cart rolled down the aisle with snacks and drinks. The clinking of soda cans, the rustle of little pretzel bags, and the cheerful voices of the attendants made the atmosphere warmer. When the cart reached Jordan's row, the attendant smiled at him again. "Would you like something to drink, honey? We have apple juice, orange juice, soda, and water." Jordan hesitated. His voice was small when he said, "Apple juice, please." The woman beside him made a small noise, almost like a scoff. She turned her face to the side and muttered something under her breath, too low for others to catch but loud enough for Jordan to know it was about him. He lowered his eyes, focusing on the little cup of apple juice as though it was the most important thing in the world. The attendant handed him not only the drink but also 2 bags of pretzels instead of 1. She winked at him, her smile warm and reassuring. "Here you go. You deserve it." Jordan's lips curled into the smallest smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind him that not everyone saw him the way the woman did. Some people were kind. Some people noticed his effort to stay strong. He sipped his juice slowly, staring out the window. The clouds outside looked soft enough to touch, and he imagined himself floating on them, free from the cold stares and unkind words. A while later, the woman finally spoke again, her voice sharp. "So, where are your parents? Why are you even traveling alone?" Jordan blinked, caught off guard by the sudden question. He turned his head slightly, answering softly, "My dad had to stay behind for work. He arranged everything for me." She raised her eyebrows, her tone carrying disbelief. "And he thought it was a good idea to send a child alone on a plane? Unbelievable." Jordan didn't reply. He looked down at his hands, his little fingers tightening around the empty cup. He wanted to say something back, something to defend his father's decision, but the words caught in his throat. His dad had told him not everyone would understand, and it wasn't his job to make them. Another passenger, the same man who had offered to switch seats earlier, leaned slightly forward and said in a calm but firm voice, "Ma'am, maybe you should let the boy enjoy his flight. He's not bothering anyone." The woman turned her head sharply toward him, her cheeks flushed with annoyance. "I'm simply stating the obvious," she snapped. "Children shouldn't be left to travel like this. It makes everyone uncomfortable." Jordan's heart skipped. He wasn't sure what everyone meant. He glanced around nervously, wondering if the other passengers truly felt the same way. But when his eyes met the young woman a row ahead, she gave him a small, encouraging smile. Her expression told him the truth, it wasn't everyone who felt that way. It was just this one person. That realization gave him a small burst of courage. He lifted his chin a little higher and turned back to the window. He didn't need to answer her. He didn't need to justify himself. He knew his father trusted him, and that was enough. Time passed slowly, the plane cutting smoothly through the skies. The soft hum of the engines became almost like a lullaby. Some passengers had fallen asleep with their heads resting on the windows, while others read books or flipped through magazines. The cabin grew quieter, calmer. Jordan closed his eyes for a moment and thought about what his dad always told him before bed. "You're more than what people see, son. Don't let their words write your story. You write your own." Those words wrapped around him like a blanket. He sat up straighter, breathed deeply, and decided that no matter how cold the woman remained, he would not let her ruin the adventure of flying through the clouds. He pulled out the little notebook his father had packed in his backpack. The cover was blue with a rocket ship drawn across it. Jordan opened it to a blank page and began to sketch the view from his window: the wide wing of the plane, the soft puffs of clouds, and the endless sky stretching ahead. Drawing calmed him. Each line of the pencil felt like a way of pushing out the heaviness inside him. As he sketched, he felt lighter. The woman beside him gave another exaggerated sigh, but he barely noticed. He was too focused on his little drawing, too focused on holding on to the joy that was still his to claim. By the time the captain's voice returned over the speakers, announcing their cruising altitude and the clear weather ahead, Jordan had already finished his sketch. He looked at it proudly, smiling to himself. The sky he had drawn was his reminder, he belonged up here, just as much as anyone else. The woman could fold her arms. She could mutter under her breath. She could pretend he didn't deserve to be there. But Jordan knew the truth. He had every right to sit in that seat, to watch the clouds, and to enjoy his journey. And the way he held himself quiet, calm, and strong was proof of something his father had always believed: dignity shines brightest when tested. The flight had been in the air for over an hour, and the cabin had settled into its rhythm. The sound of pages turning, quiet conversations, and the occasional clink of cups filled the space. The hum of the engines blended with everything, like a steady background song. Most passengers had grown comfortable, but the woman beside Jordan still shifted in her seat every few minutes, as though she could not let go of her irritation. Jordan sat quietly, flipping through the pages of his notebook. He had drawn another picture: a city skyline under clouds, with a small plane soaring above. It gave him peace, but he knew the woman's mood hadn't changed. Each time she glanced at him, her lips tightened, and each sigh from her chest reminded him that she didn't want him there. The flight attendant returned to check on passengers. She leaned down toward Jordan with a soft smile. "Would you like another drink, honey? Maybe more juice?" Jordan nodded shyly. "Yes, please." The woman's eyes narrowed as she watched the attendant pour juice for the boy. Her voice cut through the calm moment, sharp and heavy. "Really? You're giving him extra attention? He's fine. Why don't you focus on the rest of us?" The attendant straightened, keeping her voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, I'm here for all passengers, including this young man. If there's anything you need, I'll be happy to get it for you." The woman waved her hand dismissively. "I only asked for water earlier. That should tell you something. I don't need special treatment." Her eyes darted toward Jordan again. "Unlike some people." Jordan lowered his gaze to the cup of juice, trying not to let her words sting. He sipped slowly, letting the sweetness coat his throat. The attendant gave him another reassuring smile before moving down the aisle. Minutes passed, and the woman began to tap her fingers impatiently against the armrest. Finally, she spoke again, this time loud enough for several rows to hear. "You know, it really makes me wonder. Can his parents even afford this airline? Or is this one of those situations where they get some kind of special deal?" The words cut sharply through the air. A few passengers turned their heads, their faces showing disapproval. The man across the aisle lowered his newspaper again, frowning at the woman. The young lady ahead twisted in her seat, clearly irritated by what she was hearing. Jordan froze. He felt his stomach twist, and for a moment he didn't know if he should answer or stay silent. His father's voice echoed in his mind, "You don't need to defend your worth. The truth speaks louder than any insult." With a deep breath, Jordan lifted his eyes. His voice was quiet but steady as he replied, my dad owns this airline." For a moment, the woman stared at him, then burst out with a sharp, humorless laugh. "Oh, really? Your dad owns the airline? That's rich." She shook her head, still laughing under her breath. Children these days make up the wildest stories. Anything to make themselves feel important. Jordan didn't respond. He just sipped the rest of his juice calmly, keeping his eyes on the clouds outside. He didn't feel the need to argue. He knew the truth. The passengers around them, however, were intrigued. A few leaned slightly closer, curious about what the boy had said. The man across the aisle tilted his head, studying Jordan carefully, as though trying to decide whether he was telling the truth. Not long after, the captain's voice came over the speaker again. His tone was warm, almost personal. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're cruising smoothly at 35,000 feet, and the weather ahead looks wonderful. Before we continue, I'd like to take a moment to personally thank a very special passenger on board today. Young Jordan, it's always a pleasure to have you with us. Please give our regards to your father when you see him." The cabin grew still. Heads turned. Eyes widened. The air felt different, thick with realization. Passengers whispered to one another, their words a mix of surprise and curiosity. The woman's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She blinked rapidly, her body stiff as though she had been caught in a spotlight she never wanted. She turned slowly toward Jordan, her mouth opening as if to say something, but no sound followed. Jordan simply nodded politely, his cheeks warm but his posture straight. He didn't smile in triumph. He didn't gloat. He just let the moment be what it was, the truth revealed on its own. The attendants, now moving through the cabin again, greeted him warmly. One of them stopped at his row, bending down to whisper, "The captain sends his regards. Your father always takes care of us, and we're proud to have you flying with us." Jordan nodded again, his small voice steady. "Thank you." The whispers among passengers grew louder. Some smiled at him. Others shook their heads in amazement. And all the while, the woman sat frozen in her seat, her eyes fixed on her hands. Minutes dragged on, and finally she spoke in a much softer tone, one that was almost unrecognizable from her earlier sharpness. I didn't know." Jordan glanced at her briefly, then back out the window. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The woman shifted uncomfortably, fidgeting with the strap of her handbag. She glanced around, noticing the disapproving looks from other passengers. Shame washed over her face, though she tried to mask it by pulling her sweater tighter around her shoulders. The man across the aisle leaned closer, his voice firm. "You should have treated him with respect from the start. Now you see." The woman swallowed hard, her jaw tight. She didn't reply. Jordan sat quietly, holding onto the peace inside him. He thought about how easy it would have been to snap back at her, to throw her words back in her face now that everyone knew the truth. But that wasn't who he was. His father always reminded him, power isn't in making others feel small. True power is showing grace when you could choose revenge. So Jordan chose grace. The rest of the flight continued with a different energy. Passengers who had witnessed the exchange treated Jordan with a kind of admiration. The attendants checked on him more often, offering him snacks, blankets, and even small gifts to keep him entertained. The young woman ahead turned back once and gave him a little nod of respect. Meanwhile, the woman beside him stayed silent. Her arrogance had melted away, leaving only the weight of her own behavior pressing against her shoulders. She avoided eye contact with everyone, her eyes fixed on the seat back in front of her, her posture tense. Jordan returned to his notebook, sketching quietly again. This time he drew the inside of the plain rows of seats, people sitting, attendants moving, and himself by the window. Beside him, he drew the outline of a woman with her arms folded, but instead of giving her angry eyes or sharp lines, he drew her small, faded, almost like a shadow. Because that's how he felt now. She was no longer important in his story. What mattered was the truth that kindness and dignity spoke louder than her bitterness ever could. The plane continued to glide smoothly through the sky, the hum of the engine steady like a heartbeat. Most passengers had settled into their own worlds, some watching movies on their screens, others napping with blankets pulled up to their shoulders. But in row 14, the air was still heavy. Jordan sat quietly with his notebook open on his lap, sketching the outline of a cloud with a pencil. His small fingers moved carefully across the page, his eyes focused, calm, and unbothered now. Beside him, the woman remained silent. She had not spoken a word since the captain's announcement. Her earlier confidence, the sharpness in her voice, and the proud tilt of her chin were gone. Now she looked smaller, almost shrunken, as if the weight of everyone's eyes on her had taken away her strength. She shifted in her seat, pulling her sweater tighter, avoiding the gaze of anyone who walked past. Jordan, however, carried himself differently. He was still the same little boy who had walked onto the plane nervously hours earlier, but something inside him had changed. He had faced unkindness, and he had not let it crush him. He had stayed true to himself, and the truth had spoken for him when the time was right. When the attendants came by again, one of them placed a small set of wings, a shiny plastic pin shaped like the airline's logo, on his shirt pocket. "For our young flyer," she said warmly. "We're proud of you." Jordan looked down at the pin and smiled. He touched it gently, his chest filling with a quiet pride. "Thank you," he said softly. The passengers around him noticed the gesture. A few gave him encouraging smiles. The man across the aisle leaned over slightly and said, "You handled yourself very well, young man. Better than most adults would have." Jordan didn't quite know how to respond, so he just gave a shy smile and looked back out the window. The sky stretched endlessly, the sunlight painting the clouds gold. It reminded him that the world was much bigger than this single moment, much bigger than one woman's unkindness. The woman beside him finally shifted and whispered, I didn't realize." Her voice was shaky, a far cry from the sharp tone she had used earlier. She fiddled with the strap of her handbag, her eyes still lowered. "I shouldn't have said those things." Jordan turned his head slightly, studying her. For a moment, he thought about what he should say. He could have reminded her of every rude word, every sigh, every look of disapproval. He could have told her she was wrong, that she had been unfair and unkind. But instead, he simply said, "It's okay." The words were simple, but they carried weight. He didn't say them with anger or with pride. He said them with honesty, the kind that only comes from someone who truly means it. The woman looked startled. She blinked, her lips parting slightly as if she hadn't expected forgiveness from the very person she had tried to belittle. Her face softened, though she didn't reply. She turned back toward the aisle, quiet once again. Jordan returned to his notebook, sketching another picture, a set of wings soaring across the sky. His small smile stayed on his face as he worked, not because he felt victorious, but because he felt free. He hadn't needed to raise his voice. He hadn't needed to prove himself with anger. The truth had come out on its own, and that was enough. As the hours passed, the flight slowly drew closer to its destination. The captain announced that they would begin descending soon, and passengers started gathering their belongings, tucking away books and finishing the last sips of their drinks. The attendants moved through the cabin, checking seat belts and making sure everyone was ready. Jordan packed his notebook carefully back into his small backpack. He smoothed his shirt, making sure the little wings pin stayed in place. He wanted to show his father when he landed, to tell him how kind the attendants had been. The woman beside him remained quiet, her posture stiff. But her silence was different now. It wasn't filled with anger, it was filled with shame. Every now and then, she glanced at Jordan as if searching for words, but none came. She folded her hands tightly in her lap, waiting for the flight to end. As the plane descended, the view outside the window grew clearer. The clouds parted, revealing the patchwork of fields, roads, and rivers below. Jordan leaned close to the glass, his eyes shining with wonder. He loved this part of flying, the slow return to the earth, the feeling of being suspended between the sky and the ground. When the wheels finally touched down with a soft thud, the passengers clapped lightly, a habit some still carried for safe landings. Jordan smiled at the sound, feeling the relief and excitement ripple through the cabin. The plane rolled toward the gate, and soon the seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers stood, reaching for their bags, stretching their stiff arms and legs. The aisle filled quickly, everyone eager to get off. Jordan stayed seated, just as his father had taught him. "Wait your turn, be patient," his dad always said. So he sat quietly, his backpack on his lap, waiting for the crowd to thin. As passengers filed past, several paused by his row. The young woman ahead gave him a soft smile. You're a very brave boy, she whispered before moving on. The man across the aisle gave him a thumbs up. Another passenger nodded at him in respect. Each small gesture added to the warmth in his chest. The woman beside him still hadn't moved. She clutched her handbag, her face pale. Finally, when the aisle cleared, she stood slowly. She looked down at Jordan, her voice barely more than a whisper. I'm sorry. Jordan looked up at her. He didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. He just nodded gently, his calm eyes steady. That was all he needed to say. She hesitated, then turned and walked down the aisle, her steps quick, her shoulders hunched. The passengers who had watched earlier gave her looks she could not escape. She walked off the plane not as proud and confident as she had boarded, but as someone humbled by the truth. Jordan, on the other hand, walked off the plane with quiet strength. The attendants gathered near the door, one of them crouching slightly to his height. Goodbye, Jordan. Safe travels. Tell your father we send our regards. I will, Jordan said softly, smiling at them. As he stepped into the bright, bustling airport, he felt lighter. The weight of the woman's words was gone, replaced by the warmth of kindness from strangers and the pride of knowing he had stayed true to himself. When he saw his father waiting at the arrival hall, tall and smiling proudly, Jordan's small legs carried him quickly forward. His dad bent down, scooping him into a hug. How was it, champ? Jordan leaned into his father's shoulder, smiling. It was an adventure. His father pulled back slightly, studying his face. You did well, didn't you? Jordan nodded. I stayed calm, like you told me. And the truth came out on its own. His father's eyes softened with pride. He kissed the top of Jordan's head. That's my boy. That's real strength. Together, they walked out of the airport hand in hand, the noise of the crowd swirling around them. Jordan's little wingspin gleamed under the lights, a quiet reminder of the lesson learned on that flight: dignity and kindness always rise higher than prejudice. And as they disappeared into the crowd, the story of one small boy on a plane, who stayed calm in the face of unkindness, lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. Because sometimes, the greatest lesson doesn't come from the loudest voice, but from the quiet strength of a child who refuses to let bitterness steal his light.